Allie with the Potomac Bead Company, and today I am going to show you how to do a leather wrap bracelet on the wider end using the half Tilas, the Tilas, and the quarter Tila beads, and also how to use a glue-in magnetic clasp. So you have seen some of our other videos, probably if you've checked them out, on doing the leather wrap bracelet and some of the techniques that are used. This one I wanted to do a little bit of a free-form technique, really featuring all the different sizes of the Tila bead. So the Tila bead originally was this full Tila, which is 5 millimeters by 5 millimeters. And then there went to the half Tilas, which was the 2.5. Now there's also the quarter Tilas, which is the 1.5 here. And really what I wanted to do was highlight those different Tila shapes. So I wanted to show you guys this kind of fun free-form wrap as I work with it and show you how I'm going to be ending it as I design and selfishly make a bracelet for myself. This idea also is really great for a masculine look because we do have the magnets that have no design like the one that I'm using here, as well as ones with designs. My husband will not wear anything that remotely looks very beaded or girly at all, but he did say he would wear a wider one with black and gray beads or kind of in camo colors. So there's an idea for you ladies when you say I want to make something. He is very cautious about what he wears, but he said he would wear one of these, so I will be making a second one with him in mind. If you do want to do this wider leather wrap bracelet in this free form wrap style, you're going to be using all three of the sizes of the Tila bead. So the Tila bead is Miyuki brand out of Japan, and again it's that nice thin 2-hold square rectangle, and then even the thinner rectangle. I'm going to be using 2 different of the quarter Tilas, 1 of the half Tilas, and 1 of the full Tilas as I design. Also, to add into the design, I have 15 O's seed beads, which the half Tila is a tiny bit wider than the width of the 15O seed bead. So I have the Miyuki 15O here in the Duracoat galvanized silver to use in it to come up and create that consistency of the patchwork. If you need any of the materials to do this bracelet, below the video there's a date stamp which says when the video was produced, and in that date stamp below it there's a little down arrow or a show more tab. If you click on that, will give you links to the Tilas, the half Tilas, the quarter Tilas, and then also to the clasps as well as to the leather. So I could do this without the leather and do it on a loom. I could also be doing this in a peyote style rather than just this loom style. But what I wanted to do was make it on the loom style and then use the magnetic clasp to actually glue in. When I come to the glue, I'll be using the E6000 glue. So I have the half Tilas in the matte khaki iris color, the quarter Tilas in the opaque turquoise and the bronze color, and then those full Tilas in the dark topaz AB color. So I'm kind of adding them all together in that fun color range, highlighting them with those 15 O's. For the leather that you'll be using, 1.5 or 2 millimeter will work really well with this antique silver magnetic clasp. For the width that I'm doing here, it is a 18.5 millimeter. You want to test out the width of the actual clasp to determine how wide you can make your bracelet. So you'll need to kind of determine that as you start to make. I am going to glue in again with that E6000 glue. Have a toothpick handy ready to glue in. Also with the leather, I prefer to use scissors to cut the leather. And then I have my thread zap or my thread burner here for the actual thread and burning down the thread ends. The thread that I'm choosing to use so you can see it a little bit is the Wildfire beading thread in the green color. If I would have wanted to not see the thread, I could have hidden it with the black color, but I am wanting to see the thread a little bit. So I'm going to be doing a traditional wrap style where you are going to see the thread on the edges of the bracelet. Also, you may want to have handy a ruler and a needle nose pliers. The needle nose pliers will flatten out the thread as you're working with it, and I'm working with a size 10 needle. So I'm just going to explain to you guys how to get started and then kind of how I went from there. So as you're designing and getting ready, you need to start with your leather piece. The leather piece that I need is going to be double the length of my wrist, plus I want an extra 3 inches. That's going to allow me to fold over the leather as well as have a little bit more to hold on to. Eventually, I'm going to cut the end of this leather here, glue these last piece of leather and the start of the tilas into the clasp. To get started, I had little piles of all of my beads and my threaded needle. When you get started, you bend your leather in half. Again, this is a 2mm leather. It's a Greek leather in the black color. And I tied the thread onto the end here of my leather. So doubling over the leather, I simply tied on a 5-foot piece of thread to the end. You can see here's the tail remaining. To start, I needed to determine exactly how wide I can make the bracelet in order to add to my clasp. I wanted it so it would sit inside the clasp, and when looking at the clasp here, I wanted to make sure that when I get down here that I can pinch this in towards one another and it'll sit inside the clasp. I'll be doing that at the very end of the bracelet, which is also going to glue in a little bit of that last row of the Tila beads. Because I'm gluing in the last row of the Tila, I wanted to make sure that this end was flush, meaning I strung on the Tilas, making sure that they were all flat and that I didn't have one exposing. That first row of Tila then, the first stitch as well as the second stitch, is just straight. From there on, I added in the 15-0 seed beads in order to help give variety to it, closing and opening beads and having them be off. So that way when I strung through one set, I may be going through the first hole or the second hole of some of those Tilas and half Tila beads. To create this mosaic look then, as you pick up more beads, you're going to use the 15-0s to close off one of your areas. Adding beads then in, you can use the 15s in groups because again, they're about the thickness of one of the quarter Tilas. To get the design, it really is just picking it up as you go in to the design. I have my thread here already started and I'll go over exactly how I determine which beads to pick up. I want it to look very much so like it is a patchwork or a mosaic. So I don't want a lot of the same colors next to one another as I'm working. Because of that, I really am going to kind of pick up at random as I'm designing. I have the beads and I'm just kind of moving them from my bead on it board onto the bead mat here. And I have a number of the different beads laying on the mat. I'll also pour out some of my 15-0 seed beads and get them ready to join in the design. So again, when starting the design, I simply tied the piece of thread with the needle at the end of a 5-foot piece, leaving about a 4-inch tail at the very end of the thread. I strung on a Tila, quarter, half, quarter, quarter Tila. Then, looping the thread around, sewed back through that same hole again before going on to the second hole. I'll go over that now as I pick up and add more beads. As I got further into the design, I started picking up seed beads in order to make it so that it is this pixelated and mosaic style. That allowed me to add some half Tilas and Tila beads at opposite intervals from one another, so it wasn't just straight beads. Once you go through the center row of one of the Tilas and you're progressing on, you're going to have a section of each, every other bead or every other loop where you see 2 threads coming from that area. So you have 2, 1, 2, 1. This one will be 2. On the opposite side, it's the opposite. So here there's 1, 2, 2, then 1, 1, then 2. Every time you sew through and above the thread, you're going to want to go over the bead before going through the next bead. There I have the next section started, and you can see I have some openings here where I can add some extra beads. From here, I'm just going to pick up at random. I have a half Tila there, which I know then can accommodate either another half Tila, 2 quarter Tilas, or a quarter Tila and a 15-0. I picked up the bronze since I don't have any bronze in the previous row and sewed through. So I got those 2 beads in there. Here above the Tila, I know that I have room for either 2 half Tilas, some seed beads, or I can do some quarter Tilas. So I'm going to do here a quarter Tila, a half Tila, and a seed bead, and then sew through the next half Tila. When you're sewing next to the leather, you always want to come over on top of the leather and then take your thread under the leather. I'm going to sew straight across to the other side, reinforcing going back through all those same exact loops. When I sew back through those same holes, I'm going to bring the leather then on top of, or the thread on top of the leather again. Going back through those beads one more time, then I'll get ready to progress and add my next grouping. So I like to really keep these in line and even. So I'm going through each bead, basically each hole 3 times. When I come out the other side here, I'm going to go out the other side. That way you'll see those thread ends. Tuck underneath the thread. And I'm going to get ready now to add my next variety. I'm going to get ready to add another one of my full Tilas, and I need space to do so. In order to add the full Tila, I'll add a couple seed beads, so that way I have a nice flat area to add my next Tila. When I go in then and I need to add my extra thread, I'll go over that as well. So I have 2 seed beads, and I'm going to pick up another one of my half Tilas, sew through to the next space. From here then, I have enough space in here for a half Tila or 2 quarter Tilas or 2 seed beads, which I am going to use 2 seed beads. I add those 2 seed beads, sew through the next quarter Tila. So really there's no right or wrong way to do this. It's just picking up beads at random and knowing that the 15 O's are the same width as those quarter Tilas is very helpful. From here, I'm going to go back through that line of seed beads, and then when I come out the other end, I'll get ready to add some thread onto my needle. To add extra thread onto my needle, I'm at the point here where I don't have a lot of extra thread, but I'm not over my leather. I'm going to end my thread and add more between the leather and between my last bead. Taking my needle off the thread that's already there, I have a new piece of about 4 feet that I have that I'm going to tie the end of it around the old piece of thread. So I'm making a loop and tying it around the old piece. I'm not going to be using the old piece in my knot quite yet. Giving a nice tight pull, and even if you need to, oh, you can see my clasp wants to stick to my pliers. I'm going to give a nice tight pull, then push that knot down right next to the leather so I don't see it. Taking those thread ends then, I'm going to tie the ends now together. Give a nice tight pull. And get that knot as close as you can to the very end of the leather. From here, I'm going to burn down the ends of those thread, but I'm not going to burn it off completely because I want to know where that is, and then I'll burn the ends off completely. From here then, I'll add my needle back on to my new piece of thread, flattening out the thread end where I have it done there. You can see how it fans it out a little bit. Then I'll grab my needle and thread the needle. From here, I'll continue on the stitch then, just like I've been doing. So going over the project, then back under. By using so many seed beads in the last row, it really opened up the options for this further row that I'm doing as far as which beads I'm going to add on. So again, there's no real rhyme or reason to what I'm adding on. It's just whatever kind of look in the mosaic you want. You can do something very patterned, that's up to you, but I'm doing very freeform. So along the end here, I have those beads coming through, wrapping underneath the leather, and I'm going to get ready to add my next bead. To add my next bead on, again, I left a lot of room, and I'm going to add a half Tila and a Tila bead. So when you want to start with some of the wider beads like the Tila bead, and you want those in your backing your design and in the next row, you need to leave yourself an opening wide enough to do so by using your 15 OC beads. I'm never ending a row as I design with just a flat end. Only the very first one was getting added that way. So everything that I've been adding, I at least have one of my Tila beads or half Tilas or quarter Tilas sticking up to add into that row. If you need to, you can also use a clipboard to clip those ends down to keep them nice and flat. And then a lot of people will like to add and kind of go back and forth. I like to hold and to flip the project as I add more beads. Here at the end then, excuse me, I'll continue on. And sometimes I even put on 2 quarter Tilas right next to one another. From here then, I'm going to go back under the leather, back through that entire row of beads, over the leather, then back through under and back through those beads again before progressing to my next hole. When I progress to the next hole then, you can see that I have some openings there that I'll add a half Tila, so that way I know that I don't have, or that I'm still going to be linking on and not ending flush. So I'm going to go under the leather and underneath that leather then, sewing back through those 2 half Tilas. I'll add another half Tila in that same bronze color, then right back through the Tila and half Tila. So I'm sorry, quarter Tila added. Sometimes the leather will get trapped in it, and you just kind of move it out of the way. And continue on. So now I'm going to go back through these beads again, back through the row that I added, over the top of the leather, back through the beads, and then on to the next one. So you're just going through basically building this mosaic and having fun creating the seed beads in place and adding in the half Tilas, Tilas, and quarter Tilas. I'm going to continue this for about another 2 inches or so before I go in and actually glue in my clasp, and I'll show you how to do so. Once you have the desired length of your Tila wrap bracelet here, you're going to get ready to use your E6000 glue. So the first thing that I'm going to do is, oh, and I should mention too, you don't want to have this super close together because it'll bunch up. So you do want these spread out just a little bit to keep with that mosaic design. I'm going to start with the end that is open and not the end that is closed. To start with the end that is open, the last stitch, I'm going to stitch through the very end 2 additional times. So going through the beads once, and then back through again an additional time. Once I'm through there, so you'll see the 2 ends on both those 2 threads. Once I'm back through, I am going to actually knot off the thread inside next to, or between the leather and the seed beads there. So I'm going to create a loop. So through that loop once and twice, and then pull that in close to those seed beads. Once I have that, I'm going to take the thread zap or the thread burner, burn down that thread end so that it's right next to the beads and you can barely see it. From here, then I'm going to get ready to glue in the start of my clasp. So the clasp itself is super heavy duty to allow it to dry and a little bit less resistance on it. I'm going to take the clasp in half and only start with 1/2 of the clasp. You want to make sure when you do the other portion of the clasp that you're using it so that it links correctly onto the clasp itself and that you don't have two ends trying to meet next to one another rather than on top of one another. So to begin, what I'm going to actually do is I'm going to glue the last section of my Tila beads to the actual end of the leather. You can do this either with your E6000 glue, or you can get your super new glue if you have that handy. And right now what I'm doing again is just gluing the thread end right there down to the leather. E6000 glue will work as well. I'm just doing this for time savings. Once that dries, I'm going to cut the leather flush with the end of the project so that way I can glue it into the end of the project, that last row of Tila/seed beads as well as the leather. So give that a minute or two to dry and then grab your scissors and actually cut the leather down flush. Now that I have that leather cut down flush, I know because I glued it that the thread is not going to come off the end. I'm going to get ready and just make sure that it fits to glue in that little last piece of my Tila bead as well as the end of the leather, which you can see is going to disappear inside that magnetic clasp. To do so, I'm going to get ready with my E6000 glue. And you may want a toothpick handy or a pair of, or a needle handy. I'm going to go in and actually glue down that end. So I'm going to go ahead and get the E6000 glue out and spread it along the end of the actual project. So I'm just getting some of it out of the tube here. And again, I'm going to spread it around the end of the project. And you don't want too much because you don't want it to come out of the project itself. So I have just that little bit on. Stick the E6000 glue down. And then I'm going to go in and kind of move it around inside the clasp, and I'll even flip over the clasp and get it in there nice and tight. If you have any extra glue that's kind of popping out the end, you can clear that away with your needle before it starts to dry. The E6000 glue, you want to give it about 2 hours to really cure and set well. I even say don't wear it for that first day. Wait until you get done the project and have it really set for about 24 hours. Once I am finished with the one side and it has had a little bit of time to set, not its full setting time, I'm going to do the same thing over here, gluing down the end of the thread to the leather. And then once that dries, getting ready to trim the leather down. So I'm not really worrying about the loop. If you do have 2 pieces of leather too, you could have just used that. I use the loop as just something to hold on to. So that's up to you whether or not you want to have that leather in there. From here, as it dries, then I'll take the cutters and trim down the leather and then do the exact same thing. Again, making sure that those 2 pieces are going to connect in the same regard. So if you need to, you may want to keep it attached to the end and glue it that way. Basically, one of your ends is going to be facing up and one is going to be facing down. As you go in, you'll notice that one is that way when you put it out, and the other one is going to be opposite. So I'm going to wait for this leather to dry a little bit more, then I'm going to trim down those ends flush, just like I did on the other side, making sure then that that thread is not coming off the end because that glue is in there. And again, if you want to use the E6000 glue, you can do that for that. With this thick leather also, if you don't want to injure your scissors, you can also use a wire cutters, and the wire cutters will cut the leather nicely for you. Once you have that cut on this end too, I'm going to go in and glue this end together, and then I'll get ready to have my clasp all finished. Once you're done gluing in your leather to any connection points, you can burn down with your thread zap. You have that nice mosaic look with the Tilas and half Tilas. This is just a different way to end that wrap. Most of the wraps that I have, I end in a button clasp. Again, this is more of that strong, sturdy clasp, and the look that you're going to get is one that's a little bit more kind of that masculine, feminine. So again, if you do want to do something that you think would be a little bit more masculine in look, you can check out some of these ends. We also have a number of different types of leather and wider ends too that you can check out and look at those. Again, if you need any of the materials for this video, you can go back to the beginning of the video where I listed out what materials we had. And once you're there, you can get links to all of the different materials that we have online to shop with me at potomacbeads.com. In addition to shopping with me online, you can also check me out on Facebook and Instagram, as well as on our Facebook group for beading and jewelry making. The Facebook group for beading and jewelry making is a great interactive group where people love to make jewelry, give ideas, give suggestions, and are really just super helpful. As always, you can also subscribe to this YouTube channel to get regular updates when we do new product introductions like the corridor Tilas, as well as projects and ideas like this also. As always, thank you so much for watching, and have fun playing with some of these new magnetic clasps, as well as all the different shapes of the Tilas.